All right, everybody, I think we're about to get started. I think we have about 20, 25 minutes of content, including a live demo, and then we have time for questions at the end. So welcome, everybody. This is Finding the Rhythm, Agile and Open Source Development in Harmony. My name is Hadley. I'm a principal project manager, technical at Red Hat, obviously, work in RHEL mostly.
Yeah, I'm Sabine Vogel. I'm a senior Agile practitioner, also working at Red Hat, and we've decided to do this together today. All right, so you might wonder why there's an orchestra. Well, I think we started with the belief that Scrum, Agile way of working, could only work for a well-organized and structured orchestra. With the conductor, you can think of the product owner or Scrum Master, and having sheet music, it's everything defined, you have defined practice times, you have all your well-written defined music, you have different sections, different specialties, you do play together in harmony, at least that's the goal, and you even have a certain dress code for the concert. So with that in mind, our teams went into following all these practices and setting up the meetings, the Scrum ceremonies, and practicing. And some of the teams for them that worked really well, and they were happy with it, and they got better, and that was their structure. But then we also had other teams that didn't feel right. So they had first problems coming up, small disharmony, where people were playing out of tune. People said, I've always been working by myself, and I've done that for the last decade, so I'm just going to play what I've always played. And that created disharmony. Then we had no-shows, unexpected. It's like, well, we do have a meeting. Where are these folks? Well, they're not there. Or we couldn't plan work because it wasn't visible to us. So we had external dependencies. Just like upstream, you know. So you don't really see what's going on, and there's some disharmony created. And many times it was said, well, this is just, it's upstream work, so it doesn't work. And that created the question, yeah, so what it meant for our reality is, okay, so problems when sprinting, you see that you're constantly pulling one work item or multiple work items into the next sprint. And you don't know what the status is. You're not able to establish a consistent velocity or even some sort of predictability. And as I said before, if the teams are working upstream, then that work usually isn't visible in our Jira instance, so we couldn't plan for. All right, so then some people shouted loud, well, Scrum isn't for our team. It's not right. But actually, the question is, Scrum is a framework, and you can adopt it. So how do you actually get to the point where you make this work for your team?
So we decided to do an experiment a little over a year ago. We tried to find teams within Red Hat that were willing to do Scrum, even knowing that there were these problems. And we could intentionally bump into those problems. See if we could come up with some techniques and some ways around them, maybe come up with some tooling to help make some of those problems work a little easier. So what we found is that thinking of it as an orchestra isn't quite right, especially when you have an upstream community involved. So it's more like a jam. It's more like a jam band or like a jam circle where you have maybe some core players, but you have other people who are improvising, people who might jump in, jump out. So I actually have a little bit of experience with this. I have some really good friends who are talented musicians, much more talented than I am. I'm a new contributor in that area. But they play a mix of improv music with some defined set list type of things. They're really good at it. So one of the things that they like to do when we're hanging out is to do a jam. So kind of invariably, when the night gets long enough, the drinks are flowing, someone proposes, let's jam. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know how to play all these fancy instruments that you all do. So they usually hand me the bass guitar, that black one, actually. Just play this one note and just try to keep the rhythm. And so I can jump in, I can participate, I can at least do that. And what's really interesting is that then everyone starts playing on top of the beat, and they start improvising. And maybe some guy comes in with a really good guitar riff, and I'm just keep strumming. And then, sometimes it turns into freestyle rapping in Rebel fighter helmets. That might happen too. I'm just keeping the beat going. So the analogy here is, think of Scrum kind of like the beat. It's a cadence that some people can follow, and it creates a framework that you can improvise on top of.
Yeah, so with all the obstacles that we had to face, we did work with the teams, and we came up with these 4 main items. And I'm sure that many of you already recognize those. So the first area was the teams need to know when to tune in and when to tune out. That also can mean smaller scoped work items and have iterative contributions. So not everything needs to be done in one big leap. So make sure that you break it out. And also, you can split the work into smaller work items and make sure that you do control the things that you can control. And the last item is thinking from upstream. So you do hold the connection with upstream and make sure that you're constantly in sync. And Eric will take you a little more into deep dive.
Yeah, so let's dive into these a little more. So the first one I'd call maybe a principle of, sometimes you just need to tune everybody else out and focus on what you can actually control. So if you think about an upstream community, they're fundamentally a dependency on your internal team. They can't be counted on to necessarily follow your Scrum cadence. You're not going to necessarily get that review within your 2-week section. So what you should focus on is what you can control. You can flex the definition of done. It doesn't necessarily need to be customer ready by the end of the sprint. You could define a task that just means, get the patch upstream, submit the patch. That might be your definition of done for a single task that you can put into a sprint and then can complete within the sprint, because that piece is all under your control. Then you can have secondary pieces to come back once upstream delivers. So on one hand, you kind of have to know when to tune out and just focus on your team. There's also a lot of benefits if you do make some of your Scrum practices visible to the community. So you can create this framework. We have some teams that are talking about publishing their sprint information when they work with the upstream communities. So send to the mailing list, we're starting this sprint, it goes this long, we're going to focus on this feature, we're going to do X many reviews, and that can give people a context of how to contribute and what might be expected, or kind of join the flow, follow the beat, if you will, of a team that is doing Scrum. And then one other point is that if you should leave room for those unexpected things. So you never know when that review might finally come in. You don't know when that merge is actually going to happen. And so leaving some of your capacity in a sprint to account for that would be a good practice. So then you can just pick it up. Okay, so then the next 3 I'd call like 3 methods that you could use to kind of get this to work and get upstream to jive with downstream, let's say. So the first one is to just make the actual work smaller. Smaller itself. So rather than develop a giant feature set that might take you 6 months to do, can you try to do it in small iterations? I do hear that communities oftentimes want to see fully developed features, aren't interested in reviewing like a commit series when it's not done yet. But I'd argue that's a little bit of a mindset shift that could be done with the community. We have a couple examples of this actually in OpenStack, one of the Red Hat products. So they have it worked out that reviews can happen in the middle of MR. They're looking for iterative reviews. And so it might be a little small to see, but you can see like code review +1, for the moment +1, until I review the whole series. So you can start to get some initial feedback. There's even a negative comment there. And that's really good to know. If you were going down the wrong path, you found out in a week and a half that you were maybe going down the wrong path, not waiting 6 months to have it fully developed, and then you submit it upstream, and then you realize there's a problem. Okay, and then the second technique you can do is maybe you still have a big feature, but you can break it out into smaller tasks. Let's say you can subtask it. You could make, we need to design first, then we submit the merge request, then we get peer reviews, then we bring it downstream with a rebase. You can make any number of these things, and that can be really helpful because you can individually put those pieces into the sprint with a definition of done that you can complete by the end of your 2 or 3 weeks. Often I'll hear, well, that's a lot of overhead. I don't want to make 7 tasks and make them all correct and put the right information in them for every change. That's so many tickets, I don't want to deal with it. So we put together an automation that I'll show you that can make it much easier. You can also, if you do this way, you can tag the type of work. So we do that with upstream work, dev tasks, QE tasks. So if you're using this tool, it puts labels on all of these sort of types of tasks. And then you can start to analyze how much work am I doing upstream? What percentage of my capacity do I spend doing pure dev work, testing, upstream? And then that's something that you can account for. Hey, we want to spend 20% of our time working on upstream. You've got it tracked, you've got it visible. You know, management can understand that that's where part of the capacity is going and that it's important and that it should be protected. Often you might get, you know, a number of critical issues, CVEs coming in, and that can often push out other types of work. But if you can recognize it and measure that this is an important piece of a team's everyday work, you can make sure that it gets planned for. And then the last thing I'll show is this sync from upstream idea. So you have issues, PRs, merge requests in an upstream project, but they're only visible in the upstream project. It would be nice to have those also in an internal planning tool like Jira, but you get into this double accounting problem, and you get into needing to make more extra tickets and try to keep them in sync. There is some tooling out there that works, but it usually requires a webhook into the project, which is okay if you're closed source and you control everything. But there's so many projects that Red Hat works with that are unwilling to let Red Hat have a webhook in the project, even if they're the primary contributor. So we had to come up with a different method to do this. And we realized that, hey, if these are all open source, they're public, we should be able to hit that page like a user and either scrape the data or use like APIs that are available to get what we need and then put it into a tool like Jira and keep it in sync. So this is a project I've been working on for about 6 months with a developer, Kleber Rosa, and we have it supporting GitHub, GitLab, 4Geo, Pagure, and Bugzilla right now. And it doesn't seem too complicated to add additional repos. It's more about just understanding what fields they use and how those map into Jira. And so it uses a combination of a Python scripting tool and native Jira automation. And so I have an example of the Jira part over there on the right. So it does a check when you put a title of an upstream issue in the summary. It kind of does this complex regex to see what site you're coming from and then how it's going to actually pull the data. But this is what I'll show you in a little bit. So this can reduce all of that double accounting. OK, so demo time. I'm actually going to sit down because I'm going to be doing a few things at the computer here. I'll get out of this presentation, go over to Jira. All right, so I'm starting with, let's call it a large feature, something that'll definitely take longer than a sprint. We tried to maybe scope it smaller, do it iteratively. That didn't quite make sense. So the technique that we have is to break it down into smaller tasks so that each of those tasks can fit into a sprint. This is a public instance, so actually anyone in a community could go look at this ticket. If anybody has a laptop and wants to prove it, you can go to this URL, issues.redhat.com/browse/rel-96079. So that's the publicly available URL. You can see the version it's targeting. You could even see if it's planned into a sprint. So we have a sprint field here, and this is visible if you're just anybody. You don't need to be logged in, and you can kind of see what the team might be planning on doing. So we're going to use an automation to generate tasks, and it would be helpful if those are all connected in an epic. So one of the first things we do is make an epic, and I created an automation to do that. So you generate epic. And now this runs in the background, and it creates a new epic. It links this issue as a child of the epic, and it copies over some important information like the rel 10, fixed version, components, priority, I think a few other things. So if I refresh, you can see we got an epic link here. So it prepends it with epic with the same exact title of the issue that I was just working on. So now if I go to this automations tab, we built it into this field called planning. It doesn't really matter what the field is. It's just a checkbox field. And then we have all these different templates of the types of work that you might want to split out so that you can you fit the work into a sprint. We've been adding these essentially as people request it for whatever someone might find useful. It would be nice to have an option here so you don't need to do any manual ticket creation. So we're talking about doing something involving upstream. So let's say there's definitely going to be an upstream task. Some teams break work out into maybe a dev and a QE. Oftentimes I'll see maybe a QE task get split off, and then you just use this main ticket to finish up. Doc tasks, if this is an issue, maybe you'd want to have a root cause analysis task. You can even say, I just want to review or update a patch. And you can create as many of these as you want, so I'm just going to click this check mark. The automation is going to run in the background for a second, and then I'll refresh. And what it will actually clear out everything I selected in the planning field so that you can use it again. You can create as many of these tasks as you'd like. So it should be good for now. I'm going to refresh. So now that planning field is cleared. So if I wanted to create a second upstream task, that's totally fine. Some teams are actually interested in, once the ticket gets to in progress, automatically create X number of tasks. So if you have a pattern where you always want to do dev, doc, QE, you could set it up to just generate these without needing to come in and even click anything. So if I scroll down, so it creates all these new issues with a split to relationship so that they're easy to find. It prepends it with the type of task it is, but more importantly, it puts a label on it. So let me go here. And it also it defaults right now to make the tasks themselves security restricted to Red Hat employees, because maybe you're putting some more private information in the task about how you're exactly doing something. But maybe in this case, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to open it up. In case anybody's checking out the issue, you should now be able to see this task as well under it. It's labeled with upstream tasks, as I was showing you, so you can make those pie charts to show the different type of work. OK, so that was splitting work. So that's one automation we have. You can also sync to upstream issues. And so I created a repo that we could use just for this. And I'll create a new issue. All right, so that's probably a typical issue that most people are used to seeing. All right, so the way it works is you just copy the URL, and you can paste it into the summary. All right, so I'll refresh.
Yeah.
There we go.
Magic.
Yes. Thank you. And we're still connected to the epic. We still have upstream tasks. We still have version. It's still with the team, priority. And it also put it under that epic. So I'll just go there real quick. So now we have our epic bucket. And then inside that, you've got the main story that we were working with, and then all the different tasks that we just generated. So if I come back here, we also, you can sync and do updates. So if I come over here, let's say, I guess I could edit the title. I'll just to demonstrate, I'll put something here. And maybe I could say it's closed now. And so we're just, maybe we're just living in the repo. The issue eventually gets closed. And we want to make sure that that gets reflected back over in Jira. So come back here. You'll notice that when I put it in the summary, it actually clears it, replaces the title with the title of the actual issue upstream. And then it puts that URL into the external issue URL. I just picked a field that we could use for that. And then there's two ways that this updates. So right now we have it on a daily sync. So every day, I think at this, once a day, it will go in and update everything. You can also go and force it to update. Right now it's called sync from external URL. So that got my new changes. And it should also get the status. Let me do another refresh. Closed. So didn't have to touch anything in Jira, was just working in the upstream project, and now I can go reflect that, and it can reduce all the double accounting. And so we have this on about 15, 20 projects inside Red Hat right now, and we can very easily add more if anyone wants it in your project. Okay, so let's see, did the split task, did that, the sync, so I think that was everything I wanted to demo today. All right, I will come back, and we can finish up the slides.
Okay, and with that, we've used that as a key to harmony, as we've demonstrated items that the teams have worked on to finding a solution on how to work with upstream. For us, it's very clear Scrum is a framework, and to us, Scrum is the beat, as you described before in your jam band. That is something that provides you the cadence, the rhythm that everyone joins in, and it provides the base rules of how to interact and how to collaborate. And very important is to keep in mind that you need to experiment, be very flexible, and adapt to change. And anything new that's coming up, you can create a solution for this. So we didn't have all these items from the beginning. They were built one after the other. And we did a lot of learning. And we went with the flow. I think that's very cool. And we demonstrated that Scrum does work with community projects when you focus on what you can control and also embracing the unpredictable areas to continue. So whatever there is, if my colleague used to say, well, if Scrum isn't working, it's a self-inflicted conflict. So just make sure that you stay within the framework, but you do make the alignment and make sure that you work towards harmony.
Absolutely. So maybe we can end up with something a little more like this. There's some orchestra elements, there's some jam band elements, and we can all be in harmony together. Thank you very much. And we definitely have time for questions. I see a hand over there.
Why was the original story that you started with already in a sprint? Shouldn't you only put the smaller tasks?
Yeah, so the question was, why was the initial issue that I showed already in a sprint? Shouldn't you do that during planning kind of later on? And I would say absolutely, you should. I really just wanted to show that you could put these items in a sprint that was publicly visible as a way to kind of share with the community what your plans are internally. But usually, right, you'd create that issue, you wouldn't put it in a sprint, you'd make the tasks, if you were following my example, and then the tasks are what go into the sprint when you're planning it. Good question. Any others?
So I have a question about the automation. If I understood correctly, like the things in the Jira are kind of like the interface for the automation which is happening somewhere else, which does the heavy lifting.
Correct.
So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I can explain that just a little bit. So we tried to do this purely in Jira automation, and you could, for a little bit, you could do it. But as we started to add different platforms, there were so many differences that Python just made much more sense for something like that. So Jira calls out to the Python service, and then it writes back through the API. I think I saw another question. That's another great question. We kind of ran into so the question was, what do you do with story points? Do you put it on the main item? Do you put it on the task? Kind of when? We've tried a few different methods. The one that I personally like is if you're never going to put the story into sprint because you're always doing the tasks, don't put points on the story. Maybe leave it at 0. And then you can size the individual tasks. Because then that's what you're trying to figure out your velocity. So you did X many tasks, they were various sizes, now we know that's my velocity and I can do capacity planning. That seems to be the most effective way if you're trying to focus on like a velocity capacity understanding. And then to add on to that, there's a field in many of the upstream repos that is kind of like story points. I think it's called wait in GitHub or GitLab. And so that's actually one of the next features we're working on. So if there's a value there, it copies into the story points of the Jira issue. So again, you can try to live in one tool as much as possible. Yes?
So you show the creation of the new task based on the something pre-configured, like created for the doc, for that, for that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it something you just configure the options, or is it something, for example, AI can think about the ticket and can propose you which other task you would
it's a great idea.
Do you think it would be going that way as well, or just something you, as a person, configure before and you're just choosing from the options which you already have?
Yeah, so the question was like that the task breakdown, was this pre-configured? Could there be some AI that's maybe helping you analyze what tasks you should do? I think that's a great idea, but we don't do that yet. It's definitely pre-configured. And that piece is all in Jira automation, so we do just have, you can use the UI. It's essentially when that field when the checkbox is checked in the planning field, you generate a new task, you link it, and then you choose which fields you want to copy from the issue that you were splitting from. So that's all manually configured right now. So if someone wants a new task, you go into the automation, you add a new if clause, and fill out which fields you want to sync. So I see one here and the one there. You first, yes, please.
Okay. So you said there are so many other projects that use this in Red Hat today. What would be the process to onboard to this, or take advantage of this?
So the sync from upstream, the question was how can we get this enabled in other projects in Red Hat? So the sync from upstream, we have a little more of a process around it, kind of a spreadsheet where you sign up. You need to request that external issue URL field. And then essentially I just add your project to the automation rules, and then it will enable it. The split task automation is very similar. You just have to enable that field in your project, make sure it's scoped to those values that you want, and then it could also enable the automation. I'd say hit me up on Slack.
Okay. And one last question,
Sure.
You had a component mapping, right? So I
Yes.
think the logic is in between component mapping to the repository.
Yeah.
You had a distribution component in the story or something.
Yeah, so that's maybe a rel-specific thing. They do component, every team owns components, and so you have to set a component, and that knows what team to route it to. So something specific to rel. And then,
regression pipeline, we maintaining like the 4 versions and
Yep.
doing the testing for all these. Once it's executed, we always find some issue in automation, and we need to fix those, analyzing, retriggering, how to tackle these many unpredictable tasks.
yeah, so that comes up a lot. It definitely, the more completely unpredictable it is, the harder it is to do Scrum. But usually what works out is just reserve a lot of capacity for that. If you could get to an understanding of this much typically comes up within a 2-week period, and we can plan for some other percentage, then just know that ahead of time. Do Scrum only planning for the 30% you can count on, and then whatever comes up, comes up. And then eventually you'll start to still see a velocity that will probably average out over time, I'd bet. And then that's something you could use for capacity planning. So leaving room is what I'd recommend. I think we have.
You said there was automation, or that you're planning some automation when you transition to like planning to new automatic.
Yes. Yeah, that's the next iteration of this. So the question was, I had mentioned that you could automatically generate tasks when an issue moves into a new state. And so that's definitely possible. That's the next thing we're working on. I'm working with the kernel team actually, because they have a really good 3 or 4 tasks that they want to see on every issue. And they have agreement across the teams that these are what people would like to work. And so we can set up a special rule just for them. If it's a kernel component and your issue goes into planning, generate those right tasks. Yeah?
So you update the subject line to trigger off the automation, right? A lot of us don't like to use the web UI because it's slow. CLI scripts, I thought. If we update the subject line to Python CLI script, it would still trigger the automation.
You should, yeah, it will. I mean, I haven't actually seen it work, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. It looks for the change, and then it will trigger off the change. Unless they're a test. Mm. Yeah.
And if you submit a pull request, then you might complete the sprint, but you don't have, in reality, the potentially shippable production kernel. So when you say that the Scrum is like the rhythm, what is then the difference of understanding Scrum as rhythm?
Right.
Difference of this between doing development in iteration.
Right. So the question was, if one of the goals of Scrum is to have a potentially shippable increment at the end of the sprint, like how does that work if you don't actually have something to ship? You're still kind of working iteratively. It's not quite ready. I guess I don't have a great answer for you. Scrum is a framework, and it has to be a little bit flexible. I'd go back to the definition of done. To me, getting things done in a sprint ends up being more effective than a high ideal of being able to ship something to a customer every 2 weeks. It just doesn't really seem like the reality most of the time. Maybe bug fixes, maybe CVE fixes, I think could happen. But larger features that involve an external dependency, I think that's really tough to deliver to a customer within 2 weeks. And then we have there's so many processes just to get something to ship within RHEL, legal compliance, crypto, there's so much to do that I think we have to be flexible on that and just focus on what we can control and can finish, still trying to finish those smaller tasks to their definition of done might be the closest we can get. And I think I have, say another one?
So just to set some context, you're an engineering community team in Red Hat, and you work exclusively in an upstream repository for tracking velocity, technical purposes, Jira is reduced here. Is there anything stopping this automation that you've developed for, say, you're opening your issues up in the upstream repository, but you also have community contributors taking up those issues? Do they, when they complete them, get mapped back into your team's Jira repository, and how does that look against your team's actual capacity velocity at the end?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, if you're working with a community and maybe they're picking up issues, how does that look in your boards? Right now, we don't have it set up where just anytime a new issue gets created in the project, we mirror it into Jira. You have to be very specific and put in the URL of the issues you do want to track. So I'd probably only start with the ones that your team is actually working on. But that being said, maybe you're interested in just tracking the process of it. Make a dashboard in Jira to see dependent work maybe that's getting done by someone in the community. And in that case, this would work. It's publicly updated tickets. We can still sync every day. You'd get any updates from those tickets. Once they do eventually close it, you'll see it close in Jira, and that can be a signal that something's ready. Yep. All right, I think that's all the time we have. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.